Hey guys, good morning.
Good evening.
Yeah. Well, how was Red Hat today?
Very good.
Nice. Yeah. Uh, what uh, what projects do they have you guys working on?
So I'm basically working on cluster file system, Red Hat cluster storage.
Okay. You cut out there actually. Can you say it one more time? Did you say Red Hat cluster?
Red Hat cluster storage cluster.
Oh, okay, got it. Red Hat cluster storage. Nice. And for you, Anand?
Well, good morning, Lisa.
Good morning.
And today was awesome. And most probably, I will be working on ODO, Openshift Cli. It's a CLI, just like Messi CTL, built on Go, Cobra, Viper. I will be writing some test cases for them.
That's funny. Of course, you're working on a CLI.
Yeah, actually, just a great coincidence. Like I was working on CLI here, and
ये
I
गणेश
will work on.
गणेश की बेटी हॉस्पिटल है ना
Yeah.
पूछा नहीं तुमने
Yeah, no kidding. Anand, that's fantastic because you're gonna get really good at that now. And actually, I expect probably Meshri CTL will be probably much improved over the course of your time at Red Hat, which would be great. So
Yeah, that's what I thought. Actually, it's good that I'm working on audio, and it will be great to learn new test cases like unit testing, integration testing, and the other testing frameworks. I would probably integrate with Mr. CTM with those tests and all.
totally, yeah, that's perfect. Uh, and then it's interesting because I'm familiar with. I guess it's just been so long. I'm familiar with OpenShift CLI. I thought it was. Is it? I thought it was OCI. I thought I can't remember the.
Yeah, actually, it's OC. The newer version, it's ODO. Actually, OC and audio are both there, but audio is like simplified version with least complexity. Like you don't have to worry about the complex commands.
Got it. Okay, interesting. Which is also kind of a focus of Meshri CTL is like how do we add up some of those powerful capabilities, but keep the CLI very keep some of the commands as short as possible. Okay, cool. All right. Well, let me put the link to the meeting minutes into our Hangouts chat, and I will also say that Sanjay is here this morning or this evening, which is great. And it's, in some respects, hey Sanjay.
Highly good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. In some respects, kind of nice that we've got a little bit of a daylight savings time mix up because maybe we'll have some in-depth conversations with just the four of us. I'll probably hold this meeting again in an hour just because I expect we're probably missing a few people.
Mm-hmm.
So let me. So hopefully, if between the three of you, if you can jump into the meeting minutes, put your names down, and then let's talk about some of the areas of focus for each of you because each of you have some things that I'm hoping we will advance a little bit. And Nikhil and Sanjay. And maybe if you guys are okay with it, maybe we'll start with Sanjay, because I'm excited that Sanjay's here, and yeah, and because Anand and Nikhil are how do you say it? Chopped liver. Yeah, they're old news. uh,
Uh, yesterday you pinged me to issues which I have to work on. So yesterday I couldn't get time because of the Holi.
oh, sure.
So I'm looking into both of things. It's mainly related with the mystery, CTL and GKE. So I'll work on them if at all. So I think I'll work on both the issues and I'll see what. So I think these require some code changes. So I'll do and I raise a PR so that you can review it.
Awesome. Yeah, very good. And it makes sense about the holiday, kind of getting being there. I figured that
This
well,
one.
yeah, that maybe we would talk about it for just a minute, just to make sure that um, that your mind is totally wrapped around it, that you don't necessarily have any questions, or that you don't foresee any issues. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the gist of all of them. And so Anand, by the way, Sanjay, Anand has been um, probably the longest standing contributor that has focused on Mesh CTL specifically, and so good that he's here. Good that you guys can meet and talk, and he'll be helping review the PRs and things like that. So uh, we're I'll say this, that the CLI is one of those areas that you can get the user experience wrong. Um, it's kind of funny because when you think about UX or UX and UI, when I think of it, I certainly think of uh, the application's user interface with the clickable, a mouse and a clickable interface. But the CLI is also um, a human, a point of human interaction. And for many administrators, a lot of times it's the more comfortable interaction, because they can get a lot of things done quickly. They can script around it. Um, and so considering giving some forethought as to the structure of that CLI is important, because just like when you design a user interface and you start to train and teach the user how it is that the application works, that over time, if you go to change the color of a button or change the style of a button, that users can get frustrated because if you change it on them. But sometimes you're changing it for the better, and you're rearranging the screens for the better. And the same thing can happen with the CLI, where if we end up creating a certain syntax structure, that we might find that people actually write scripts around that, and then later on, as we go to figure out that it's really best to restructure the CLI. So in this case, when we think about the work that you might be doing and the feature that you might be enabling around letting people create their cube, export their cube config from Minikube, letting them more or less restructuring their cube config to be GKE compatible, or restructuring their cube config to be AWS or EKS compatible. That when we think about what command that people, what the syntax should be that people invoke, it's important that we give consideration and some amount of forethought to it, so that ideally it's intuitive here and now, and ideally it is structured to withstand some forthcoming features. And so, having said all of that, much of what that forethought that we try to give, or that design, kind of goes into this document here. So this is the Meshry CLI commands and documentation. This is more like Meshry, a bit of Meshry CLI reference. And Anand, I think just in the last time that we spoke last week, a new command has come forth, the Perf Command. And I know you've been giving some consideration to this, and really the Perf Command, there's an initial version of it that very much so stands to be improved. So Anand, when we come back to your turn, we'll talk more about the Perf Command. But Sanjay, in terms of potentially bringing forth a new command called config, I hope that this is the appropriate structure for this. I'm not sure that we've given it all of the best thought. Anyway, if you were to follow this syntax, or rather, I guess, think about it as you're going through. And if you,
So I'm still reading about it. So what I understood, if I have Meshry CTL Meshry running in my laptop as a mini queue, and I want my Meshry to connect with the GKE, I should be able to import the Meshry config so that I can connect to GKE or GCP EKS, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Let me go ahead.
And where I'll get, so I'm assuming I can have more than 2 EKS running in AWS, or more than 2 Kubernetes GKE clusters running. So how will I distinguish? I need to think about that as well, right?
Yeah, now that's a great question. I'm glad that you're thinking that far forward. The reality is that today inside of Meshry, it doesn't have an object. It doesn't have a construct for allowing Meshry to connect to multiple clusters. That clearly needs to change. Like, clearly we need to allow what you just said, which is connecting to a couple of different instances of GKE, another EKS at the same time, all of the above at the same time, or having each of those configurations loaded, and then being able to switch between contexts as well within those clusters. Really, the thinking that we've given here is the notion of bringing forward the concept of an environment, and that concept hasn't been created yet in Meshry. So there's certainly a design session to be had there, but because we don't have that for the moment, you wouldn't need to consider for the moment. You will Meshry CTL will only connect to one cluster, or you can limit it to that. If that makes sense. So if someone runs Meshry CTL config generate, and they export and generate their Minikube compatible config, that whatever they've generated last will overwrite or will become
Okay.
Now,
okay,
that's not ideal.
So maybe I'll play more with the current setup of tools so that I can understand it's working, and I'll see how I can achieve that. At least I'll start with the single cluster, then we'll see how we can enable the multi-environment or multi-cluster at the Meshry level.
Yeah, getting to the multi-environment will be that'll be awesome. That'll be one of those things where we actually need to finally design a little bit of an object um, model for the project, because the point of bringing forth an environment will be to say, hey, these are the different constructs, these are the different objects that are related to one another, and how are those relationships done? Are those one to many or one to one? And when you create an environment, what all things can be associated? We actually, Sanjay, this is a great point. Like, we actually really need that kind of today, because Meshery you can load up any number of adapters inside of a running instance of Meshery. You can, and we haven't really diagrammed that. And Meshery is quite powerful in that regard. You can use a Meshery Istio adapter to connect to any number of instances of Istio. It's that adapter is stateless, so you can connect to a bunch of different Istio deployments. You can also load up any number of Istio adapters and like multiple instances of the Istio adapter in your Meshery deployment. And you might want to do that because maybe you've got a multi-region thing going on or a multi-cluster thing going on. But we have a simple document that is in the user guide, in the Meshery documentation, that talks about that. But there isn't a diagram, and so yeah, we're going to end up needing some of these object diagrams, object model.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Nice. Okay. Good. Well, in this case, you can't go wrong. I think. I guess what I was trying to call out is we haven't given as much forethought as we need to the command syntax. But if you were to, but so long as you're taking a stab at it, we'll figure it out as we go.
That makes sense.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Cool. All right. Next topic. Well, I guess I'll let you guys decide. Anand, Nikhil, or Shubham? Who wants to go next?
So,
Yes. Hey.
Actually, I don't have any progress because my laptop broke down last day before yesterday. Because of some experimenting on my laptop, and so I didn't completely set up the Meshery, but I just downloaded it using the bash script, but I'm not able to access that Perf command. I don't know the version. Actually, why? I don't know. It downloaded 0.3.9. I just downloaded it, so I don't know how it happened.
Yeah, no, interesting. Okay, yeah, no. I'm running, or I have Meshery CTL installed on my system with Brew. Not that it should matter at all. But yeah, I think that the 3.10 was released really recently. I don't remember.
Just day before yesterday, I guess, because I checked on the Slack. So
Okay. So then so it definitely needs improvement. The Meshery CTL perf. I mean, one thing is that. One thing is that there's a guy, Peter Yasek, had opened an issue yesterday, just saying that, hey, Meshery CTL in general, when you type Meshery CTL and don't give it any subcommands, it returns the empty, just an empty set of lines. And he had opened up an issue suggesting that it instead if you don't have any subcommands, implicitly it should call something like a meshry help, meshry CTL help.
Yeah, like previously we do have that, no?
Yeah, I had thought that we did. Maybe that was accidentally changed recently, because right now it doesn't. It's just if you do meshry CTL, there's nothing.
Yeah, actually, I will go through that and I will see what changes. Like it must be done by someone with
Oh, okay.
permission, like root.go. So
Gotcha. Okay.
I have to go through that.
So Sanjay, actually back on your. Oh, right. Okay. Sanjay, back on your issue. There is a global flag today. So these flags here are global. Some of them are, I think a couple of them are kind of boilerplate, if you will. This dash help and this dash toggle. Anand had worked on a dash V for version, which is nice because it'll just tell you what version of meshry CTL the client that's running, and more or less there's something of a placeholder for assessing what version of meshry the server is running. So very similar to kubectl. This actually is incomplete at the moment, in that meshry, when you run this command, it is not querying the meshry server, but we need to. That's an outstanding item. Actually, Anand, I don't know if we have an open issue that tracks that. We should. I'm gonna put that into the meeting minutes. Anand, maybe if you don't mind, maybe you could open an issue to kind of describe what we need there.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, nice. But Sanjay, what I was trying to say is that there's another global flag dash config that I don't know. Okay, it says an error. This flag needs an argument. This command should work. It's related to you trying to produce Minikube and GKE and EKS configs. This command lets you tell meshry CTL where your cube config is. By default, meshry CTL will look to your current user's home folder and look to a hidden folder in there, and then a YAML file, a Docker Compose compatible YAML file. And so if I do, who am I? I'm Lee. If I were to, hey, this is my home, it's user/Lee. And then within there, do I have a private folder .meshry? In there, there are two things. One is this Docker Compose file, which has a description of, oops, that's not what I meant to do. It's the meshry compose file that when you do a meshry CTL start, it will, it describes the 6 or so containers that need to be started up and gives them some environment variables, things like that. So this config is the meshry CTL config. The meshry CTL, today it controls the lifecycle of meshry, and so on my machine meshry is not running. But if I did a meshry CTL start, it will take that config file, or it will reference that config file and basically do, in this case, it's essentially under the hood, it's doing something like a Docker compose up using that file, kind of like this. I don't know if this even works. But anyway, so that config, that global config, slightly different than the config that you're trying to create, because that's, you're trying to create a kube config file, and this global -- config flag is pointing to Meshery CTL's config.
So Lee, I have one more question for that. So what will be use of that config? Sorry, it might be a bit lame, but
No.
I'm not able to figure out like where I will use that config.
Right. The the minikube config, or yeah, okay, yeah, very good. Like, so let me stop sharing the terminal, and I just ran a Meshery CTL start, and so it just started Meshery CTL on my machine locally. And so, so here's the Meshery UI. When Meshery, the server, because when you look at Meshery, just as a brief review, speaking of object diagrams and things, we do have at least this architecture diagram posted. I think I'm starting to lose my voice, which is bad, so I apologize. But Meshery itself, Meshery as an application, it is these green rectangles. It's 6 or 7 containers. One container is Meshery, the server, and it's where most of Meshery's code is. Most of what Meshery does is in this container. The web server that serves this user interface, this is within the Meshery server container. So it's served up from within here. And then there are any number of other containers that will start up when you start Meshery. There will be one container per Meshery adapter, per service mesh adapter. And so those adapters, those containers, there's one container now running on my system for the Meshery CPX adapter. That's a Citrix service mesh. There's one for Meshery Istio, for each of these types. And as a user in the user interface, when you hover, it's kind of nice because it'll tell you, hey, that adapter it's a container that's running locally in my Docker environment, and it is listening on port 10,002. And what it's listening for is commands from Meshery itself. So as a user, I'm sitting up here interacting in the UI. I'm going to be clicking things in the UI and telling Meshery to tell the adapters over gRPC. And in the case of console, I think it was running on 10,002, it would send the commands over gRPC over port 10,002. And if the command is to spin up an instance of console, well, Meshery and the Meshery adapter, it will need a kube config file. It will reference a kube config file like the one that you would be exporting from Minikube. It would use that kube config file and the credentials, basically the certificate that's within there, to go over and speak to or invoke REST calls against Kube API. And much of how Meshery works is almost all of Meshery's functionality, not all of it, but most of it, expects that you're going to be interfacing with Kubernetes. And so when Meshry starts up initially as a server, as a container, that container that I started on my local system just now, it has a local volume mapped to my user Lee. It has a local volume mapped to my user's home folder. And in my user's home folder is also the default location for my cube config. And so Meshry, since when the container starts, it has access to that home folder, it looks for a cube config file under .cube/config. It'll open it up automatically, basically without asking the user. It opens it up and reads it. It finds the, irrespective of how many clusters and how many contexts you have in there, it'll load them all up. That's great, but it'll basically kind of ignore everything except for the current cluster or the current context. I forget what the name. I think it's current cluster and then current context. And then it will display that to the user here in the UI. That because I didn't have to. I just started Meshry just now, and I didn't configure Meshry to point at that cluster and GKE and Minikube and all these things. And this is what I'm saying, that eventually we do need for it to connect to a bunch of Kubernetes instances. We just haven't gotten
by So by default it connects to current context, right?
Correct. If you wanted to change that though, the user, as a user, you would go to settings up here, and under settings there are kind of 3 tabs. There's one about your environment, which is literally there isn't an object inside of the Meshry code called environment, but we need to make one at some point so that you can connect to any number of Kubernetes instances. Right now, it just assumes that you're only going to connect to one, which isn't, that's okay. It's not great. And in this UI, you can connect to there's an area for configuring adapters and configuring connections to Grafana and Prometheus. So under this environment, it basically, it found the fact that I'm using an iMac right now. I'm running Docker desktop, which is really convenient for running a single instance of a single node Kubernetes cluster, which is what I'm running. So it found it, it loaded it up, and it just assumes I'm going to use that. If I were to click on this chip, is what it's called. In React, the component is a chip that Nikhil and others have helped us create functionality to do a quick test, so that as a user, it's just whenever I click this, it's in Meshry is doing a quick check to confirm that it can use the kube config file that's loaded up. It can use those credentials to speak to the Kubernetes API, and I think it invokes like a get Kubernetes version number, API version number, something simple that doesn't really matter. It's just it's sort of conceptually, it's a quick ping, if you will. And that's why we say ping is literally not ICMP, but it's a REST API call. That's me. But it could be the case that look, it's also true on this same system that I am running Minikube. And in part, yes, that's because I spent the cost of a small car to buy this iMac that has this one has 32 gigs of memory. The laptop we just got has 64 gigs of memory, and so I don't want to buy another computer for a long time. So they're loaded up with memory. That's great. The point is, this machine also has, I believe, Minikube installed. And right now it's stopped. But if I were to start it, I can then, once it's started, I can go back into the Meshry UI and remove my connection to Docker Desktop by clicking the X, Then I would come over here to load up my other cube config. That would be for Meshery, I'm sorry, for Minikube. And so that would be under, well, right now my default config is here under .cube config. If I were to go over to Minikube and do an export, actually, did you see that just now? You see how just now the arrangement of these files switched around? Well, something happened, and that's because this file was just updated. I don't think it was updated based on Minikube being present, but anyway, we can load it up, and actually that's right. It was changed based on the fact that I just started Minikube, because the current context now is when it loaded up that file, it's able to read through and look at what different clusters and what different contexts I have. And since Minikube just started in the time that we were just talking, Minikube updated my config file. Now I've loaded that config file into Meshery, and it's saying like, hey, actually Meshery is not able to reach Kubernetes. So Kubernetes config could not be validated. We're unable to ping the Kubernetes server, which is an okay error. It could be even more helpful if it gave the user, so Nikhil, like if we were able to click on this and it would give you a modal that said, here's troubleshooting steps for what to do to figure that out. And the troubleshooting step, Sanjay, in this case, it's actually like in the future, based on the work that you'll do, we may be able to auto remediate that error, because the error that's happening right now is probably and I don't know, but it's probably the fact that I don't have the right credentials maybe inside of my kube config to talk to the Kubernetes instance running inside of the Minikube VM. So if I go back to my terminal, Minikube did start up, right? It's, it did its thing. kubectl is now configured to use Minikube. Okay, and that's why my config file was updated literally before our eyes a second ago. So if I do a kubectl get node, wow, it's failing, right? And this would be also probably why Meshery is failing to talk to Kubernetes, because I'm assuming because the Minikube, the configuration inside my kube config is probably references like an old Minikube. So kubectl config view. So if we go look at that inside of my Kubernetes, my kube config file, inside of there, I do have a few different clusters. These are the same, Docker desktop. I have one called Kubernetes. I have another one called Minikube, and these were the same ones that we were seeing in the Kubernetes in the Meshery UI. We were actually seeing the context names. So Kubernetes-admin. We saw a context name called Docker for desktop. We saw one called Docker desktop, and we saw one called Minikube. Now this one for Minikube, it's using this certificate and this, so I guess the point of the thing is, if I were to go export my Minikube config, right now I don't my irrespective of Meshery, just my user can't even talk to the Kubernetes instance running inside of Minikube. So if we did, the like get pause or what have you, it just sits here and will time out and say it can't talk to it. And that's why you'd normally, as a user, you'd use a command Minikube I forget what it is, Minikube config export or something. Let me share. What that looks like. So far, are you guys following what I'm kind of what's happening here?
So looks like I just tried in my laptop. I have two contacts. I'm able to connect to both from my laptop, but when I try to import those using UI of the Messi, I'm not able to. So it's giving me same error. Like kubeconfig could not be validated, unable to ping the Kubernetes server.
Okay. Okay, so you're so that's in some respects that's good because you're in the same situation that I'm in right now.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So to remediate the issue manually, and this is something that I think as you do work here, you'll improve the whole experience because people won't have to go do manually what we were about to do. But within the Meshery documentation, users, if they go look at the supported platforms, Minikube is a supported platform. There's a quick start guide for each platform. And part of that is telling you that you need to be running a certain version of requirements, that you would start up Minikube. In this case, it's telling you, hey, make sure you start up Minikube with enough memory to do all of what you might want to do with Istio. And then the second step here is that this configuration file will be used by Meshery. So we need to export, minify, and flatten basically our cube config into such a format that Meshery CTL can read it. And I actually don't know that this is going to work and fix my issue, but let's try it. So if I go back to the terminal, wait, if I export that command, the reason that I'm saying I don't know that it'll work is because already I'm not, my cube config file isn't working for interfacing with Minikube. But so that cube config file is now here in my local users folder. So it has the public or it has the private key for interfacing with Minikube. As a local test here, I don't. If I were to do a kubectl and I forget you guys remember the syntax to be able to use a different cube config? Like you're able to point to a new file. Because ideally I would point to that file and do a test with it. If the cube config flag is set, then only that file is loaded. The file may be set once, no emerging data. I don't know if this will work or not, but if I say that I want to use this config file, get pods. So that did work. It is trying to reach Minikube, and it doesn't look like it's able to. The point being, Sanjay, is that normally people would run that command, they would export they would minify and flatten their cube config file. They would then go into the Meshery UI that I'll bring up. In the Meshery UI, they would go ahead and load up that config file, config minikube.yaml.
Okay.
And Meshery will read it. It will try to interface with Cube API. and it's saying that it can't, which is I'm sure true that it can't, that even I couldn't do it from the CLI, just from the terminal just now. And because of that failure, we don't get a small chip, a small little blue chip that says you're connected to Kubernetes. Like an interesting thing to note here is I loaded up a different YAML or different kube config file. And when I did, there's actually only one cluster, one context in there. So just as a visual confirmation, I'm no longer seeing Docker desktop and these other things because we literally loaded up a different config file. So yeah.
So with same context, I have one thing. If we go to the command message generate has some platform name. So I was just thinking instead of platform name, if we can ask for the context name, kubectl context name from user and get that data.
Yeah. I don't have a very intelligent response. I think that's in part because because you have to think. We have to think about it a little bit. It's like, okay, so so the scenario is. I think we played through a scenario, and this is where we should write some of this down inside the design doc about what these scenarios are and why it makes sense to have a certain syntax. But one of those scenarios would be, so I'm a user. I've got Docker Desktop and I've got Minikube. So basically, I'm running two of the supported platforms, if you will, if I can use the platform term, which I think is appropriate to describe the fact that I'm running a Kubernetes instance inside of Docker Desktop, and I'm running a Kubernetes instance inside of Minikube. So I've got two different clusters. They've got they're totally separate. They each have their own certificate. They each have generated their own certificates and have their own service accounts and all that stuff. And so from a Meshery perspective, Meshery is a piece of management software that that ultimately we want to be able to load. We want for Meshery to be able to connect to any number of Kubernetes clusters. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So then and some of those clusters, the GKEs, the EKSs, the mini cubes, we need to prepare the format of that kube config file so that Meshery can more easily digest it, or that it has all of the right credentials to access Kube API. For for EKS and GKE, that has a little more to do with special things about those clouds, about IAM, about that are specific to those managed Kubernetes environments.
So that's my concern. So thing is, I'll go back to my previous question. If you talk about if we only ask for platform name from user, so here platform name is my like EKS, GKE, Minikube, right?
Right.
So in GKE, for example, if I have two clusters, right? So how will I distinguish because if I only take the platform name from user and run the GKE command in background, I won't be able to distinguish between multi clusters if I'm getting two clusters. If I have two clusters of GKE or for example EKS in particular region, I have two clusters, so I'll get the how will I distinguish? Okay, I want these data or this data. But if I ask for context, user kubectl context as part of the user request, I can easily distinguish. Okay, for EKS, I want this context, right? That context could be cluster name, or it could be something else. But and that is what I'm thinking of.
Yeah.
In on similar line, my thing is I'm assuming when user is using MSDCTL, At the same time, he already has the access of his kubectl uh, environment. It could be on GKE or EKS or Minikube. He already has the access, so he don't have to set up that particular access once more when he is trying to access the message. Even if he want to, he can use the standard process of GKE or EKS. And once that setup is done, instead of querying the cloud, I can query the config file and get that particular user context. That is my understanding, but I can read more on documentation so that I can see if what I'm saying makes sense or not.
I think what you're saying makes a ton of sense. That I that on one of the things you're saying is that it would be nice if the onus of responsibility is a bit more on the user to have their local kubectl configured such that they can interface with GKE, for example. That we should be able to expect that if they're going to be using, if they're going to be running Meshery locally, that they would have already configured their own kubectl and their own environment to work as it should, as they would normally run kubectl commands to interface with GKE. Great. So then, okay, then the work that we have to do to connect Meshery to that kube config file in the right way is kind of the second part of what you're saying, which is, okay, great. As I look at that syntax, geez, considering that in GKE I could be running 10 different clusters, and then each one of those clusters could have 10 different contexts. Like, wouldn't we want to include that cluster name and context name potentially in the command that we're creating for Meshery-CTL? That makes a ton of sense. The reason that I think that the answer is yes. That would be good. The answer is yes. It would be good to have that. In part because while there are 10 clusters in that GKE environment, maybe I either don't have permission, my user, and consequently sort of the Meshery user, or I only want Meshery to interface with one of them and specifically one context because I'm just not ready for Meshery to do anything else. I don't want it to touch any of the other things. I want to play around with Istio or something over here. So I want to be very explicit and just say this cluster, that context. That's great. My hope is over time people are comfortable with Meshery having broad access to multiple clusters and multiple contexts, such that when they run, that the command is also capable of just having them point to the provider or the platform. Maybe provider is maybe a better word, whatever, provider or platform, that they might run Meshery-CTL, config generate GKE, and then what would come back is, okay, well, great, here's these 10 clusters, here's the multiple contexts in each of them, here's a big fat kube config file, if you will. And that when the users go into the Meshery UI, that this UI, Nikhil, would be enhanced such that what they would be seeing is the ability to that there would be an environment construct, and they would say, yeah, okay, great. Meshery is connected to my EKS stuff and my GKE, so I'll click on GKE, and then in there, okay, it sees 10 clusters, but I just, right now, I just want to interface with like the first cluster, and then after you click that drop down or whatever it is for the first cluster, okay, I want it to work with this context. So I think both are potentially true, that hopefully in the future, while you're looking at this, Sanjay, from a Meshery-CTL perspective, it's fantastic. It's the right first step. I think in the future, that capability that you're going to be writing would probably also be leveraged by the Meshry server itself to parse through the kubeconfig file, which it does today. It parses through and it looks for different clusters and different contexts, and it presents that to the user. And it would be in here, it would be nice and powerful in the UI as well to be able to identify what cluster and what context. I think both are good things to support. Someone may not want to generate access for anything other than just one cluster, one context, while other people might want to say, look, let's just load up, let's just, I'm fine having all 10 clusters loaded. I'll switch context inside of the Meshry UI. So I'm gonna go.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah. I'm going back now to load up my original kube config file, and when I do, Meshry the server, it does have the ability to parse through the kube config file and pick out different context names. And so in some respects, sort of implicitly, it's able to parse through that kube config file, understand the fact that there are multiple clusters. It doesn't expose the cluster name here just yet. Rather, it focuses on the context name. So if I select this context, it can't ping it. If I select this context, it can. I think the Docker for desktop, I think is what it used to be called, and they renamed the product to Docker Desktop or something. And so it's saying, well, here's your, this is kind of weird. Docker for whatever. Anyway, here's your context name. Eventually, it is, in some respects, it's telling you what your cluster is. It doesn't use the term cluster. In the UI, we use the term server. But as we progress through this, yeah, hopefully we'll be making the UI more robust as well. Now, what makes it even nice and challenging, even more, Sanjay, is that we're talking about all of that in context of running Meshry outside of Kubernetes. Some people are going to want to deploy Meshry as an application running inside the cluster as well. And so we'll have some nice use cases, or some nice discussions, I think, about that. That might actually be the easiest way over time, because if Meshry is just another application inside the cluster, I think that our challenge there will probably be more around getting the right service account created for Meshry as an app so that it can access other contexts and things. So wow, awesome. That Sanjay, I didn't realize you were gonna get. Actually, I don't know. Sanjay's with it. I didn't realize you were gonna get the entire hour today.
I'm here.
Yeah. Nikhil, actually, there's one thing I wanted to get to really quick with you, and that was just I think the UI mockups for the provider UI sounds like that helped. I think it's understood that I had only provided, there were two potential things to do, and of the mockups I had provided the notion that there might be a hyperlink underneath the provider, and that maybe you'd show a modal and what have you. But that it might also help the user understand what's going on if when they click on one of these, if there's a little bit of space over here, at the right hand side, or just some space underneath to basically show the description of that provider. It will just be an additional confirmation to the user that that's what they're signing up for.
Yeah, cool. Actually, that mockup was very helpful to make me understand the provider description that you wanted to show.
Nice.
So I will soon make a PR for that dialog model for the provider one, and then I will look into that of showing the details of the provider, whether below or beside one. I will try both of the options and share the details. Which one will look better? Then we can move forward with that.
Cool. Okay, good. Yeah, good. Oh, wow. Okay. Shubham and Anand, Fongking, Fanji, did we miss anything else today? Okay, Anand, you're going to open that issue. Anand, you'll end up playing around with Meshery CTL Perf, and I think you'll find it has some rough edges.
So I will start looking into it, and I will probably just by side write some test cases if I can.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Kanishkar is the Kanishkar J is the contributor that had worked on that.
Actually, there another thing. I approached, I think, Mayank, who was working on auto completion of or SH
Yeah.
for Mr. CTL. So I don't know he had progress or not. So
Okay.
he didn't. So maybe I can start something on that.
Yeah, let me tag him right here so that in case he can respond. Because yeah, I know that he had recently joined the project. He was the Meshery project. He was doing really well. But like many of us, sometimes people get other things going on. So. All right, let's see.
Actually, the autocomplete can be completed or can be solved by Cobra itself. Cobra provide like command or function with which we can add the auto completion. So, command.
Right. Yeah, right. And you know what? I think Mayank is actually using that in the command today. My understanding is that he's using it, which is what I had originally pointed him to, but that there's a bug or there's a number of open issues on Cobra about it not working, and so yeah, I think where we had left it was that he was waiting on some of those bugs in Cobra to go away, but we should that we should still ping him and check and you should be able to see the same issues in Cobra as well. So yeah, Anand, you're totally right. Like that's ideal. That would be ideal if Cobra just does it for us.
Then I look into it. There is some issue. I will go to the other bad solution which we can find.
Nice. Okay. Okay. Well, very good. Well, so we had daylight savings time changeover this week, which means that our meeting time will change a little bit. So for those of you who were here this last hour, maybe we should conclude the meeting and let you guys go. And then for Gunjan and Naveen was just on. I think he dropped.
Yes, sir. I missed it.
Hey, Gunjan. Gunjan, maybe we can spend some time catching up, and everybody else is welcome to stay. I just don't necessarily expect that you would stay for 2 hours. So if you want to sign off, please do. But Naveen and Gunjan and I will catch up. If you want to stay on, great. Please do. But so with that, maybe Gunjan, let's and Naveen, we just had an hour-long meeting. Gunjan and Naveen, we just had an hour-long meeting, and so we were talking with Anand and Sanjay and Nikhil and Shubham.
Yeah.
And so, but I have time, so we can continue. And Nikhil is going to sign off because he's got to go. Same for Sanjay. Thank you guys, Sanjay and Nikhil. And then, but let me share the meeting minutes. Let's talk about some of the things that you guys are working on.
Yes. So, sir, should I start?
No, please.
Okay. So, I'm presenting my screen. So, sir, right now, get this. So,
well.
Sir, but I'm not familiar with this SVG, so give me 1 more minute.
That's cool.
So this is like this, but one thing, when I'm trying to use the hover keyword, it is not working with this SVG file.
I'm sorry about the phone. Somebody keeps calling me.
Okay.
So yeah, no. So great. I mean, obviously, I'm excited about this. This gives me a chuckle. The thing that strikes me, or one of the ways to kind of solve the challenge that you're facing right now, and the challenge that you're facing, I think, is the fact that there's a small needle. There's a small needle, and then there's also kind of the base of the needle, if you will, that semicircle.
Yeah, yes, sir. So I want to change this portion, but I'm not getting this value. So what are this thing?
Yeah, and the issue might be that yeah, if we were able to separate out the semicircle as its own path, and then the needle as its own path, then you could just manipulate the needle, and it would, then people that would work. So let me. So the way that I had created this SVG was using Adobe Illustrator, and so if you have a visual SVG editor, you could open it. You could manipulate it and try to separate out the semicircle from the needle.
Sir, is there any software on for Linux, or can I edit this by online or something?
Right. Yeah. I don't know, only because I had clearly there's like OpenOffice, and there's a number of graphical editors that are free on Linux. It has just been about a decade since I've looked at those. So I don't know if any of them do SVGs. I have to imagine that they do. Does anybody else on the call know if there's a...
Sir, I got to know that there is a software called Figma Linux, but I'm trying with that, but I'm not getting any output from that. I'm not getting how to use the Figma.
Oh, sure. So Naveen had a great suggestion. Inkscape is another one. it might be. It is free and open source one. Actually, I think that's an awesome suggestion because I think Inkscape was designed as something of a to be focused on vector graphics. I thought like something of an Illustrator alternative, if I remember.
Okay. Sure, so I'll try with Linkscape.
Okay.
And so one more thing. So there's another issue. So in this issue, right now, this thing is not coming on this get started, but it is still not responsive.
Right. Is that did you end up seeing the issue that I had or the feedback that I had given about that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And so you've and I think what you're saying here is that you've addressed that feedback by making sure that the icons don't overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Yeah.
I think I need help to resolve this responsive this issue.
Oh, I see. So okay, so do that again if you would. Do the collapse the width of your browser again.
Yes.
So yeah, I think like ideally here, what would happen is the big getting started would sort of go away, but the install and start section with the icons, they would still remain. And so yeah, I can spend a little time and give a couple of pointers about how to make the getting started section more responsive.
Yeah, sure, sir. So that's also for today. I'm trying these two issues, trying to solve this issue from last meeting. So
yeah, no, it's a hard. Yeah, this is great. I mean, it's a big improvement, and the thing is like it's pretty important because every single person that comes to the project, whether they're contributing or using or they're going to go through these instructions. They're going to touch this area. And actually, when you look at it on layer5.io/meshery, it's also not great. It's it's really similar to what's on meshery.io right now. Actually, I think what's on meshery.io right now is better than what's on layer5.io because it has Windows and Linux and so anyway, yeah, I'll spend a little time to take a look at trying to make that responsive in the right way.
thank you, sir. So that's all for today.
Yeah, that's nice. That was cool. That was exciting about the SVG. Yeah. Yeah, it's so easy to Naveen and Fanji. I don't know if you guys have ever watch someone give a PowerPoint presentation, and when they do, it's like they tried to use every animation that was possible, and what I'm saying is like it's easy to go overboard on the animations and really distract people, but no animations at all kind of makes for a boring presentation. So just like a little bit of them, some subtle use is nice. Okay, so let me switch back to the meeting minutes. And Sanjay, maybe if I'm sorry, Naveen, if you have items to chat through.
Yeah, so I set up the development environment last week. So last week on my system it wasn't working. Istio wasn't working. I guess it was taking a lot of memory, along with some other problems, because it was single node installation, and I already had installed using Minikube without using the configuration file, and then I was using Cube ADM, so there were some changes. But I set up the Meshery and Istio on a virtual machine, and now it's working fine. I've sent the PR related to the issue of supporting basically 1.4, the versions greater than 1.4. So in versions greater than 1.4, damoauth file is basically deleted in Istio. So I've updated that, and like there are still errors that are coming due to linting or some test errors, but we'll have to look into that.
Yeah, that's a good.
So there is already a PR, I guess, Gunjan has sent in Meshery Istio adapter.
So let's take a quick look, because yeah, I noticed your PR. I hadn't tested it though, or I got a chance to review it. So Meshery Istio PR support 1.5, perfect. And so here, yeah, the static check, the error check, okay.
They were already failing, so we'll have to like check the PR by Gunjan. I guess it was 61.
No, yeah, no problem. So maybe quickly or briefly, I don't know if you guys use similar Git aliases, but I think these are now listed inside the contributor doc, the contributor guide, or the contributing markdown rather. I end up using one like this. This is sort of an abbreviation for check out a PR, and I end up giving it the PR number. Actually, I need to go into my.
Wait, Lee, I'll be back in just 2 minutes.
Oh, okay. So Gunjan, I think even some of these commands have started to show up inside of the github.com UI, which makes it convenient to check out a branch, a pull request, and inspect it. So I'm checking out PR 62, which is Naveen's PR. If I think it's a make run. This would run his. This would build his branch, right? Build his PR. And so he's been trying to build in support for Istio 1.5, which has started to change around a couple of things. And it failed in my case because I'm already running Meshery. And so I'm already locally using port 10,000. So I'll stop Meshery and free up that port. And then build his pull request, his branch. So good, it built, and now it's the Meshery Istio adapter is running on this port. Great. So if I go over and run Meshery locally as well, do a make run local. When this starts up, it'll pull up the UI, and I'll pull up the UI now, or my browser now. And it should. So it's still building. The Meshery, the make run local is still building. Okay, excellent. So it just built and is now being served on localhost port 9081. So good. So, it looks like it hasn't loaded up the Istio adapter, hasn't been able to connect to it. And that makes sense based on the Docker networking. So if I go over and point it to that local adapter, I'm sorry, not HTTP, it would be my local machine's IP address. This is the wireless port on my local machine at port 10,000. No. All right, so not that, then local host.
Hello.
Hey Naveen, hey, we just built your branch, and we're running the new version of Meshri Istio on my machine.
Yeah.
And then I'm running Meshri locally as well. And I was just trying to connect to the adapter.
Adapter. Yeah.
And I think part of my issue is maybe I just need to log out and kind of start fresh. Wow, there's something kind of happening in my. Yeah, hold on. There's something happening in my. Let me kill my browser. Just before I do, I have to finish this comment. I guess any update on Anand. All right. Okay, I'm gonna kill my browser, and then start it back up because it was having an issue. All right. So good. So the new version of Meshri Istio is built. It's running locally. Meshri is running locally. I'll go to localhost 9080 in my browser. It'll ask me to auth. Do a quick auth. I'm not able to ping Kubernetes, so let me go and do this. I was in our last meeting with the other guys. I was running both Minikube and Docker Desktop at the same time because we were talking about some work that Sanjay is going to do in Meshri CTL. So right now I'm stopping Minikube and I am reconfiguring Docker Desktop, or hopefully kubectl to use Docker Desktop. And it looks like it is, so let me reload the kubeconfig file that I'm using. And okay, good. So now Meshri is talking to Docker Desktop.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Now that that's happening, good. Now it can actually speak to the Istio adapter as well. So this is the new one. Perfect. Okay. So then in my environment, let me share my whole screen, which is good and bad. I think bad in that you guys, it may be kind of small for you guys, but good in that I can stop switching back and forth between the terminal and the browser. So in my environment, I'm running Docker Desktop. If I do a kubectl get pods all namespaces. Okay, what I've got right now is like a botched deployment of linkerd. That doesn't really matter. That's a separate thing. Other than that, I'm basically not running anything other than Meshri and other than Docker and Kubernetes, and Meshri doesn't show here. That's interesting because I'm not running Meshri the containers, I'm running Meshery built locally, and the Istio adapter built locally. Okay, so as I go to test out the functionality now, that your functionality, Naveen, I'd go over, and the menus have been updated based on the work around the issues around MTLS and non-MTLS and stuff that you and I had talked about. So I'll try with MTLS. I'll be watching for events. While we're doing that, we'll come over here and execute this again. So there has been a command received, at least for, kind of funny that Grafana was the first one to show up. Anyway, you can see it's being successful, right? Or it's you know, the command to start 1.5 was executed. The interesting thing, Naveen, when you run that in your environment, it is not running Istio or it's not running Istio D. It's running all of the individual components, right? Like this is what you see in your environment too, right?
Yeah, when we first tried, actually it errored out. The Istio adapter actually errored out.
Okay.
One thing here which needs to be mentioned is we selected Istio, latest Istio with MTLS, but what we are actually doing is just installing Istio demo without the demo auth, because the latest version already is basically by default supports, I guess, MTLS. So, but in the previous versions, that was a separate file. So for previous version, it is actually it will install without the MTLS. For the current versions greater than equal to 1.4, it will install with MTLS. So I guess that needs to be changed if the Istio version is updated, or we can just say install default Istio instead of installing with latest Istio with MTLS.
Oh, okay. And so are you talking about the text that's shown right here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. At some point, we would actually get a lot more intelligent, hopefully, and be able to allow people to specify the version that they want to deploy. So that, because then we can just go out and download that version based on their choice. And then at some point too, particularly maybe as you enter into the next phase around use of the Istio CTL Go client, then we'll hopefully be able to, it'll make it easier for us to get specific about with the MTLS or without, or allowing the users to specify certain options, configuration deployment options. So to me, hey, from a functional perspective, your PR is working, right? Or hey, the deployment here of the control plane worked. That's great. If we go, I think you were saying, hey, maybe HTTP bin is having an issue.
Yeah, there is an issue with HTTP bin application.
Okay. If we go test book info, you said, hey, book info seems to be doing its thing, and so does the hipster shop, seems to be working.
Yeah.
Let's deploy this one. This is probably, if there is an issue with the HTTP bin app, it's probably not your directly your problem, or something that you created as a problem. Unable to retrieve the resource with the matching name while attempting to apply the config. Could not find the requested resource. So to me, that sounds like the manifest files for HTTP bin or weren't able to be retrieved. I'm assuming that we're pulling those down from somewhere else.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up.
Okay. If we go look right now, we've got, I'm sorry, we've got book
book
info.
info.
Yeah. And if we do a quick edit of the, hold on. What am I trying to do here? So there would have been a book info gateway that was, okay, huh. I wonder, yeah, in 1.5 if they've removed the gateway. No, okay. So there's a book info gateway that's been deployed, just along with that same book info app deployment. There should be some virtual services, or a virtual service that was also deployed, so it was. If we described that book info virtual service, it's just saying, hey, it's a path-based routing that's going on. So if a user requests to go to this URL, route that traffic to this destination, to this host, to this service, route that traffic to this service called product page. And the thing that's called product page is here, this service. And what we need to make sure that we've got exposed externally, I wanted to bring up the app just to do kind of a final confirmation that the app is working, is to look at the services in Istio in the control plane. Specifically, let me actually do this again for Istio Ingress Gateway. So for the Istio Ingress Gateway, this is the envoy that functions as the ingress point for all requests coming into the service mesh, Istio service mesh. If we go look, there is on port 80, any request received will be redirected to 31380, or I'm sorry, yeah. And well, great, so that should be redirecting to product page. Eventually that should get to product page. Let's see. So if I go to my local host, port 80 with slash product page, I do get to book info. And if I refresh and refresh, we get the default kind of round robin load balancing going on. Great, perfect. So nice. Hey, functionally, it looks like we're in a good place from where you know, of the updates that you made. By the way, the update that you made, I guess I shouldn't ask. I should actually go take a look. Let me share my browser again. It was, how many was it a small number of lines of code? Because it was,
yeah, it was a small number line of code.
Okay, it's amazing how much we had to talk just to get to those small numbers. I don't mean that's no reflection of you at all. I just mean it's so funny how software engineering works. You know, it's because your questions were spot on, were things that I hadn't, you know, I hadn't sat down to think about. And yeah, like ultimately understanding that Istio as a project is moving away from Helm and is moving over to Istio CTL as the preferred method of deployment. Great, we would want to follow suit, and so yeah. So we might, if you can't, like if it's convenient enough right now, Naveen, if there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if there's about like 4 error checks and 2 static checks, I think, or no, if there's about 6 or 7, I wonder if you might take a quick crack at these now, or in this.
Cool.
And you can get some, I think, hopefully further hints about how to fix the issue. Here, redundant return statement. The value of this variable is never used. This is kind of written poorly in terms of the English that was used to describe this, but it's basically saying that use of this package, like when you pull in that package, wherever that, or maybe it's like it might be here, that there would be a comment right above it, just saying, describing what in human language, and what the function does. I think. But you'll see as you get in there. But other than that, this is fantastic because Naveen, we have been, as a project, we've been stuck on Istio 1.3.0 for for way too long. And the problem was every time I went to go fix it, it was like, oh no, but we have a workshop that we're giving in like next week. And so we just never came around to fixing it. And so the thing now with Istio 1.5, a lot of the slides and things that we've put together that describe the control plane and how things have changed around with Istio D, there's a lot of updates to those trainings. Also, there's updates to Istio Up and Running, that book. O'Reilly just came back to me this week on asking if I would sign a contract to update this first book, this one, and I said that I would. I don't have enough time to do these things, but the reason I'm mentioning this to you guys is because Naveen and Fanji and Gunjan, if you guys, there's I have lots of folks asking me to talk at conferences, write books, write blog posts, do things like that. I can't do them all, and I don't need to be the one doing them all. Quite seriously, a big reason why it is that you guys are here and why I've encouraged you to reached out to you and asked you to join and things is because is for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of those reasons is that maybe one of you wants to work on part of a book. Maybe you want to do a technical review of a book. Maybe ultimately that will lead to you to us co-authoring a book. Right now, actually, I'm supposed to be working on this book, Service Mesh Patterns and Best Practices, and it's not anywhere near complete because it's nowhere near started. And it's nowhere near started because I barely have enough time to, So the point is, the more that you guys learn, the more that I'll be asking if you're interested in doing different things.
Yes, sure. Sir, I have one more thing to tell you.
Oh yeah.
So sir, in linker adapter, we have check review code, error check, static check, VAT, security check, test, build check, and docker. And for some other adapters like Octady, it has only three: check, review, check, and review code, build check, and docker build and push. So do I need to add all the other features in Octane also, or should I?
Let's do it. When you do, it is when you do, we will. And Fanji, I don't know. I am so happy that you joined the calls. By the way, so if I was going to suggest that if you ever, or if you think that you're ever ready to begin to do a few contributions, wonderful that this next thing that we're talking about might be one of those areas. But so the point is that Gunjan, if you were to enable some of those additional checks, it is unnerving to contributors when they submit a PR and they get these red X's coming back.
Yeah, sure, sir.
And what I'm saying is, as you enable them, if you can get them fixed while we're going, that would be wonderful, because it's I think it flusters contributors when they go over, like Naveen, you're experiencing this right now, that you've made a few relatively small updates to the Istio the Meshri Istio adapter, and when you submitted your PR, as it turns out, it came back with a number of red X's on things that you didn't even touch.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're left wondering a couple things. One, oops, did I screw up? Did I break some other parts of the project? Or you figure out, oh no, it wasn't me, but oh geez, now now these other issues are getting in the way of my contribution being accepted. Either way, it's kind of flustering. So yeah, Gunjan, as you go to enable those additional checks, that yes, we that's exactly where we ultimately want to be. Maybe if you want to, just do it piecemeal, kind of one at a time, so that it's not an overwhelming number of failures.
Yeah, sure, sir.
Yeah, but that's great. And then Gunjan, if you can't get the just signal anytime. If Inkscape doesn't work for you with the SVG.
Yeah, so sir, I'll check this landscape, and I'll inform you if I can do the same thing with landscape.
Nice. Okay, good. And I was just gonna say, if you can't, I can tag team with you, or give you a different version that has a better SVG, or one that works for you.
Yeah, sure, sir.
So Naveen, you're about to make history. I think if these small checks make sense, if you're able to correct those, you're about to become, I think, a first-time contributor, right? Like you're going to be on the other side of this.
Sorry, my net just got disconnected.
Oh, I was just trying to poke fun at you and saying, hey, as soon as those other checks are done, you'll have unlocked your first milestone of being a contributor. At least a contributor on the Istio adapter. Did you already land a PR on the other?
No, I have not yet on the Layer5 project.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then we're gonna have to celebrate when this happens. This is good. Cool. I take any opportunity I can to celebrate. Go grab a. I was over at a friend's house, and a former employee of mine, Yogi Porla, and he apparently had a couple of bottles of tequila that he never drinks, and so I think since I was over, he thought it would be a good excuse to get rid of the tequila. So I woke up with a headache the next morning. So yeah, oh man, and my wife was not pleased. So oh, cool, very good. And then so Ashish, thanks for coming. I know we got the whole daylight savings. I should have messaged you guys much earlier about the time zone change. By the way, does the 7:30 work for you guys going forward instead of 8:30?
Yeah, it will be helpful for me.
Wait, say it again.
Sir, the 7:30, it will be helpful for me.
Oh, okay, nice. Okay.
Yeah, sure, it works.
Okay, nice.
Sir, one more thing I want to tell you that Sir, a few weeks ago, we were talking about all contributor bot, and that time at last we made that we should let the plan for the all contributor bot, and at that time we planned that we should make something for the community page, what they are working on, all those peers. So here in India, we have one thing that's called Girls Give Summer of Code. And this time I am a mentor of that one project of Girls Give Summer of Code. And I want to share one thing. So may I share my screen?
Sure.
So this is my this is my plan for Meshi.io. So here is the page. So if I put my GitHub username, it shows all those details.
Ah.
It shows all those details, my PR, my activity on my project, and so my plan is like, so if I talking about, if I click this on my profile,
Right.
it just right now it's just showing only my photos. So I want to make something like this. So this is only my plan. I have no idea how it working, the background, what the backend, all those things.
Yeah, that's nice. That's actually was going to be my first question, was whether or not it required a database on the back end,
Yes, yes,
which
sir.
which could be okay. To date, we've kept the sites to only requiring, or like all of the sites are deployed on GitHub pages for free. As you get familiar with it, yeah, let's see if it needs a database. It clearly that wouldn't need to be a powerful database. I'm sure that we can.
I guess we can do it with GitHub APIs, because let me just paste the search here, because when we author any PR, we can already like search for it using SPR and author in the GitHub. I guess there should be some endpoint public API available for it if we specify project or something.
Right.
So we would not require database. We can just directly fetch from the API then.
Right.
And list out the projects. Like we can just list out whether it is in this organization or not. I guess it must be supported.
Yeah, and to your point, I think so long as the contributions are public, or those repositories, those organizations are public, that that you wouldn't necessarily need to use an a token.
Yeah, GitHub token.
Which would be good, because otherwise, if we needed to use a token, then we need to store that securely somewhere. And then, and to Fanji's point, a good point that, like, yeah, hey, those GitHub APIs are public, are open. Yeah. They're rate limited, which I don't think will be an issue for us, because people aren't going to be hammering on it. So, yeah. So long as we don't need to have a private token stored somewhere. And Gunjan, when you look at the code base for that UI, if it doesn't require a database, that's great, because it's just less moving parts and it's something that we don't have to pay for. If it doesn't, then it would be using, it'd have a fair bit of JavaScript in there to be able to make all those REST API calls, and then sort of compile the, it's simple calculations, but how many commits, and so yeah, if that's great, that, like, just like you were saying, that all contributors is open source, and so hopefully that UI is as well. Yeah, that's cool. Gunjan, I agree that like, hey, what we have on Mesh.io today is nice, but there's not that much to it. The site itself is pretty small.
Yes.
It even doesn't, like, we actually really do need a lot of other content, if you will. Things like, hey, how do you get started with Meshery? The docs are okay. That doesn't really make it easy to consume the fact that you can deploy Meshery locally, Meshery inside Kubernetes. That, hey, what versions, by the way, Naveen, like what versions of Istio are supported? What's the difference? Like some of the work, I think a lot of times we forget to go back and update the docs, but the docs site is pretty easy to update. It's just a Jekyll site.
Okay.
And the docs site, it's actually inside the Meshery, the main Meshery repo. There's a /docs folder, and there's a Jekyll site inside there, so it's relatively straightforward.
Yep.
Hey, Ashish, did you landed any number of PRs this week? Anything that you wanted to talk about? Oh, nice. Yeah, there's the link to the docs. And Ashish is probably not in a good position to be on audio, I'm guessing.
No, sir. Hello, sir. I'm here.
Oh, you are? Okay, very good.
Yeah, sir. Landed a few issues, solved a few issues this week, and yeah, sir. Currently working on that, sir. Animating the SVG. Yeah, I will show you the results, sir. I did a bit of changes there, so but more is left to do. So I will by the end of this week, I will push up here.
Man, okay, all right. Be just like a fair warning. I mean, when I saw Gungeon's animations, I got all excited. I got giggly. So yeah, that'll be cool when you've got them pushed up. That'll be cool.
Sure, sir.
Speaking of, actually, just in the last couple of minutes that we have, I'll share this. I was.
So, Lee, actually, I was checking the documentation, and there we are like for every adapter, we are having adapter status there, right?
Right.
So, how is it like? How is the status updated? Is it like hard coded, or is it using some API for checking status from GitHub? Like, if we are using Travis, then we can fetch whether all tests are passing for the adapter or not.
Yeah, it's completely manual. It yeah, there's room for improvement there for sure. There's actually, to your point, Naveen, there is something that Ashish does a really good job of catching is the fact that we'll make a release of Meshery and then we'll forget to go back and update like the release page in the Meshery docs. And that's something just like the example that you were giving about programmatically assessing whether or not what version of Istio that we support, that there's a ton of room for improvement there. We absolutely, that's not that hard to do. As part of the build process, we should be identifying what those version numbers are, and then we can reference those. Like part of the build process, a script can run to update the release page, to update the version number that we support against. I think we have one or two open issues up in GitHub about that very thing. And various people have raised their hand to work on it, but no one has brought that forward just yet. There's another aspect to this, and that is that in the UI, when we were going to provision Istio, and it says, install Istio, the latest version of Istio with MTLS. I guess we just said it earlier that like when you go to install Linkerd, there's 2 release channels for Linkerd, the stable release and the edge release.
Okay.
There's 2 thoughts here. One, we should be supporting the fact that there's a stable and an edge and letting users choose which one did you want to deploy. Okay, and that's fairly that's not universal, but it's somewhat common for the other adapters. By the way, I think I told some of you that Layer5 just expanded and formalized its partnership with HashiCorp, and because of that, we should be seeing a console engineer pop up in our meetings occasionally and be helping with that exact thing that I just said. That console has a couple of a stedge and an edge and a stable. They should be helping with that. More than that, though, Meshery as a project, if you think about it, we don't today have much control over, and users consequently don't have much control or easy control over what version of Meshery it is that they're running. Today, when Naveen's PR is merged, 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, if a user is sitting there running Meshery will detect that there's a new version of the Docker image for Istio, for Meshery Istio, for that adapter available. It will download that new image and reload the user's running instance with it. Which on one hand is awesome because it's like, hey, it's an auto updating software feature. That's great. On the other hand, that's not what everyone is comfortable with or wants to, or is good for everyone, because sometimes there are breaking changes. And so we need to improve our release process. The only thing that really, really gets versioned and users are in control of their destiny, so to speak, is with Meshery CTL. Because a new Meshery CTL binary is not put into the releases folder on github.com unless we create a new release. There's a whole document inside of the Google Team Drive that talks about the Meshery release, build and release strategy. And a lot of what I'm saying is outlined in there, but a lot of what I'm also saying is not done. So anyway, there's a lot of, so if anyone's interested in that stuff, there's a lot of work to do there. So I brought this up, Gunjan, or Ashish rather, as just an example SVG. I can't remember if I gave this to one of you guys or not, but this is kind of a neat one. And on layer5.io, you'll see this little guy popping up. And so if I didn't give you this one, Ashish, this is kind of a fun one to play with. So cool. Okay. Well, we're at time. So guys, I'm gonna sign off. See you on Friday. Naveen will get your PR merged, and then I'm gonna go have my second cup of coffee.
Okay.
Cool. Anything else?
Okay.
You guys want to talk about?
No, that's all from my side.
Same here, sir.
Okay. Nice. Okay. All right. Well, talk to you guys soon.
Okay, sir. Bye, sir.
Okay.
Bye. Good morning.
Yeah. Waking up. Okay. See you guys. Bye.
Bye.